Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk about Death Note. And rather than giving you like a by the numbers analysis, I want to talk about one particular aspect, which is the Death Note itself and what it represents and how it affects the characters. Specifically, the paradox of power. This is something that you will find as a very prominent theme in The Lord of the Rings, because you have this one ring to rule them all, and that one ring gives you power to do your will, but it corrupts you, and through the corruption of power, you will become evil and you will do evil things. And there's many ways to approach this, like the temptation of the ring is being able to do evil without the effects of sin. There's lots of things that you could use to describe the ring of power, like it's the power to do the correct things through government, but once you establish that power, then that power gets used to do evil things as well. There's lots of different directions you can go with that. When it comes to Death Note, what you have as a paradox is you have a character, Light Yagami, and he can write a person's name down in the Death Note, and as long as he knows what they look like and knows their name, then he can kill them and they'll die of like a heart attack, or he can make them under the control of the Death Note, kill them in any number of ways so that he can basically get away with murdering people. So the temptation for Light is not just to murder people because he's a psychopath, but to murder people who he thinks are deserving of death and would improve the world with their absence. And so the paradox becomes, when you take up the Ring of Power, in this case the Death Note, when you take up the Death Note and begin the process of murdering people, you are going to put yourself in the same category as those people you are murdering. That is to say, the people you are murdering, the people you're killing them because they're evil and they're murderers, but you are engaged in the act of killing and murdering, and you're doing so without any kind of other moral, let's say any kind of other external force mitigating your moral culpability. So it's different if a person is a criminal and they go before a jury and a jury condemns them to death. There you have 12 people deciding in unison that that is the correct thing to do for that person. And it goes through, the entire legal process is there to prevent hopefully as many people being executed who don't really deserve it as possible. And it also spreads out that moral culpability so that no one person on the jury is going to feel like they actually killed this criminal. Rather, they were part of 12 people and they decided together, they all understood that this was the correct thing to do, and they all share some smaller part of that culpability. So you take it all on yourself and then you become the murderer. And so that's the paradox, is how can you do the work of the Death Note? How can you use the Death Note for good and you yourself not be worthy of your own judgment? Well, Light, during the course of the show, begins to consider himself a kami, a god. And as a god, he's a being that is above mortal. So he views himself as not really responsible in the same way that mortals are, and he views the Death Note as a gift given to him that he is uniquely equipped to wield because of his moral fortitude and his vision and his character and his intelligence. On the other side of this, I talked about this in the Revolutionary and Reformer, you have L, who is trying to stop him, and L, of course, views the means as more important than the ends. That is to say, the Death Note is evil because it does evil things, and just because you're killing people who you consider bad doesn't mean that killing them is okay, that you are committing a moral act simply because the person being killed happens to have done immoral acts. Rather, the process costs are too high, and the process costs are bad. And in the end, of course, Light doesn't really solve his problem. He doesn't transform the world into a perfect place. For years he's having to kill people, and it still hasn't really solved the problem of humanity. But through that process, Light actually transforms himself not just into a killer, but into a real sociopath, a person who's really willing to do anything in order to not just see his vision fulfilled, but to not get caught, including and this happens towards the second half of the series. The series, I like to think, and this is true of the manga as well, is broken into two big parts. There's the first act where he's facing off against L, and then there's a stopping point. If you haven't ever watched the anime, you'll know it when you get there. There's a stopping point in the middle where the story was clearly meant to end, and then there's a second arc. And in that second arc is where you really see the tragic downfall of Light Yagami as a character, where he goes from being a character that is, desperately trying to execute what he's trying to do and stay one step ahead of his competitors, to somebody that's really willing to do anything, including murdering people who don't deserve it. And that's very key in order to stay not caught and in order to stay in his position of his godlike power, whatever you want to call it. So what happens in the second half, I think, is where this, even though the second half, I think, is weaker than the first half in terms of plot and in terms of a lot of story considerations, the second half of the series, I think, is where these themes really, you really get to see them shine. So one of the things he does is, at a certain point, now these are spoilers, so you're just going to have to deal with the spoilers. At a certain point, he begins an affair. So he's living with his girlfriend. He hasn't married her, so he hasn't really done the most moral thing there. And he's living with her because she ended up with the Death Note in the first half of the story, and also did a little trade with the Shinigami who rules over it, the death god who rules over it, so that she could see people's names above their heads so she could write them down in the Death Note without having to learn who their name is. So one of the things about the series is that you're always playing with rules. And I'll do another video about how it uses the rules in a plot sense. So you set up rules, and then the plot is constantly figuring out the edge of those rules so that you have a different and unique plot, and the plot always feels really tense because you're kind of setting up new rules that are going to contain the actions of the characters as you go. Anyway, so that's her, and he stays with her because basically she's serving his goals. You get the sense, even though she's an idol and she's very attractive, you get the sense that he doesn't really care for her. And that sense is very, very pronounced in the second half, when he begins an affair with someone he went to college with who's a newscaster, and begins using her to communicate with another person who he's managed to give the Death Note to, who's going to continue carrying out the killings, and or another person who's ended up with the Death Note. And so he's quite happy to engage in philanderous activity because it serves his ends. Not only that, but there comes a point where she gets captured. And so Light convinces her to do a couple of important things, which is to use the Death Note to basically to kill some people. Then he murders her. And he murders her so that she cannot get caught, so that no one knows who he is. That's his goal, is that no one really knows that he is he's Kira. He's the killer. He's the one who is using the Death Note to kill everybody. So he murders this woman that he's been having an affair with, and he does it in cold blood. Now, she doesn't deserve to be murdered, except for the fact that she is engaging in killing people with the Death Note, just as he is. So in essence, he is saying that it's okay to kill people that are like me. And once that happens, once he crosses over that bridge, that's when the plot accelerates towards the final conclusion, and the moral conclusion, which is that Light Yagami will fail. So at the midpoint of the series, Light Yagami succeeds. He ends up with the Death Note back in his hands. He gains his memory back. He's managed to remove his memory. It's kind of complicated because of these, there's all these rules about the book. If you give away the book, then you forget that you had it. And as soon as he touches it, he gains his memories back and is able to kill his competitor at that moment, having managed to deceive him by actually removing his ability to even know that he was Kira for so long. So he gets to the final conclusion with, I think it's L's brother. They were raised in an orphanage, so I don't know if it's like a actual brother or not, but they look the same. And because he has killed this girl basically in cold blood, he of course is in the same status. he's putting himself under the same level of judgment, and he really gets caught. And so he ends up, of course, fighting to the bitter end and trying to die. And the final note is that the Shinigami who gave him the notebook out of boredom says, "I knew it would always be me that wrote your name in the book," and kills him at the end. Because, of course, under Kira's own, under his own set of standards, he's now fit to be judged. So through the process of the Death Note, he becomes more and more sociopathic. He does more and more immoral things. And he himself, even by his own standards that he expresses through his actions, is worthy to die by the end of the story. And he has failed to survive, and he's failed to remain hidden, and he's really failed to transform the world. He thinks he's improved the world, but he hasn't really solved the problem of humanity. And that's really, I think, the lesson of the theme of Death Note, and the power that really comes from the Death Note itself. It's not so much that the power corrupts, rather, it's the arrogance to assume yourself a god, like the Shinigami, worthy and able to fully understand the moral weight of choosing who lives and who dies, and to bring that upon yourself, and then to also try to preserve yourself through all of that. You are going to end up with the problem that you are falling under the judgment of your own rules, even by your own standards, when you express those through your actions. So I think it's a very interesting use of the Ring of Power, let's say, or the theme of power, and one that I think I was pretty compelled by in the second half of the series, because I think the second half of the series really doesn't quite have the oomph. It doesn't have the tension of the first half of the series. There's 3 or 4 little mini arcs rather than one big arc that makes up the first one. So the tension feels a little bit kind of here and there, but what kind of held it together, I think, was that strong sense that you're witnessing light really descend into true wickedness, and therefore bring his death upon himself. So anyway, thanks so much for watching this little analysis. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm an author and I write books. I don't know, there's a bunch of them. Here's a great one that people like if you like samurai fiction, Muramasa Blood Drinker. I think this is not the current paperback cover. This is the first edition. But you can get that. I don't remember how much it is on Amazon, but I bet you'll like it. It's got some of these themes in it too. The themes of judgment and judging yourself worthy of killing people. So you might like that one in Muramasa Blood Drinker. Check that one out. And of course, my book, Keys to Prolific Creativity, $2.99 ebook, so that you can develop really good work habits. So I'll see you guys next time. Have a great one.